everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. Today let's talk about essential world building questions. So this is going to be primarily geared towards fantasy writers, since that is the genre where you'll be doing the most world building in terms of actually creating your world. There are genres like historical fiction where you do have to do a lot of world building, but it's more research based rather than actually inventing everything from the ground up. A lot of this will also apply to sci-fi writers, especially if you're writing the kind of sci-fi where you're creating a lot of the basis, maybe new worlds, alien worlds, or even just an Earth very far in the future. Now, even though I've dubbed these essential world building questions, the thing about world building is that it could kind of go on infinitely. We've got an old video on how to know when you've done enough world building, and I'll leave that in the cards since a lot of people do get stuck in the world building loop where they never really know when to stop world building. But these are kind of all the basics that if you cover these, you'll probably have a pretty strong handle on what your world looks like and how it works. Let's start with the name. What is the name of the world? What about different countries or kingdoms or cities within this world? Are there different provinces? And where do these names come from? What do the words mean? Are they named after people? It can be a really fun Easter egg to include some kind of world history to the names of places. Category number 2 is geography and climate. What does the climate look like? What kind of seasons do we experience? What's the terrain like? What kind of weather does the region experience? What kind of distance are we covering? How is the land organized? You might want to draw out a map to keep track of everything for this one. The next category is culture. You could spend forever developing cultures. There are so many interesting different nuances to a culture that you can explore, but here are some of the basics to get you started. What are common societal values in this culture? What about cultural customs? What kind of food do people eat, and how is this influenced by the geography? Going through world building, you always want to think about intersections as well as logic. So the geography will probably influence the food, but it'll also do things like influence the clothes that people wear. What do different kinds of clothing symbolize or mean, or why are they practical for the environment? What kind of architecture do we see in the buildings? Again, how is this related to the climate? What kind of occupations do you see in this society, and especially occupations that are quite common, that we see a lot of, or ones that maybe we don't have on Earth? Is there anything that might be a necessary occupation in this world that we wouldn't have a reason for on Earth? That can be something really interesting to explore. What kind of prejudices or oppression exist within this society? Who faces discrimination and why? What kinds of prejudices do some people hold against others? What kinds of social classes do we see, and what is the relationship between the different social classes? What about leisure? What do people do for fun? What kind of sports do people play? What about hobbies? What about the artwork in this culture? What about the literature tradition? Next up, what about religion? What kind of religions or beliefs do people hold? What kind of practices do we see? Are there various religions in this culture? What's the relationship between the different religions and people who practice different religions within this society? Now, what about science and technology? A lot of fantasy takes place in a historical time period. You want to ask yourself how advanced science and technology is. A lot of fantasy is inspired by a real historical time period, so you might want to use a real historical time period as kind of a reference for this. If magic exists in this world, how has magic influenced the development of science and technology? What are commonly held beliefs about the world in relation to science? If we think about historical science, it wasn't always completely accurate, such as when people used to believe that the Earth was the center of the solar system. What kind of scientific beliefs do people hold based on the technological advancements of the society, even if they're not necessarily accurate? What about language? What language or languages do people speak? Is there a written form of this language? Who in this society speaks what languages, and what do those distinctions mean if more than one language is spoken? Now, what about education? How do people usually receive their education, and until what age? What kind of subjects or topics do people learn in school? How valued or important is education in this culture? And what about relationships? Are there any dating or marriage customs? At what age do people usually get married and start families? Does marriage even exist in this culture? How many children do families tend to have? Is there any custom around, say, the firstborn being the inheritor of the family wealth or anything like that? Now let's talk about the fun part, which is magic. We do have an entire video on creating a magic system, so I won't rehash everything here because it's covered pretty extensively in that video. I'll leave that in the cards and in the description. The main thing to think about with magic is how it intersects with every other topic covered in this video. If magic exists in this world, it's going to have a huge effect on the development of the society. How has it impacted religion? How has it impacted technology? How has it impacted Education. How has it impacted social classes? Who has access to magic? Is magic learned? Is it genetic? There are infinite things that you could think about with magic, a lot covered in our other video on magic systems, but it's really important to think about how it intersects with all other aspects of your society. Now, what about politics? A lot of fantasy novels are very politically driven, so this can be a really interesting area of world building to really sink your teeth into. What's the structure of the government? Who's the leader of the government? How is the leader chosen? Is it inherited by blood? Is it determined by combat? Is it a democracy? What kind of government structure do we see? Do we see an oligarchy? A monarchy? Is an absolute monarchy or a constitutional monarchy? Do we have a democracy? There are so many different types of government structures that you can research in real life, or you can just create your own. What kind of other positions do we see in the government? How are those positions chosen? Are they chosen by the leader? Are they elected? Are they inherited? How effective is the government? Is there any kind of corruption? Another category that might really play into your plot is military and conflict. What kind of military does this society have? How are people chosen to go into the military? Are they drafted? Is it just a militia? How does magic play into all of this? How large is the military? What kind of weapons do they use based on the technological advancements of the society? And along with that, what kind of conflicts or wars are currently taking place, or crucial ones that have taken place in the past? Are there any military conflicts with other countries? Are there any wars currently going on? Also, when thinking about the current state of the society, you want to think about the economy. Are there any substantial problems with poverty? What kind of resources does the society have? Imports and export? What kind of currency is used? Is there any kind of bartering system? You can also think about crime. Is there any kind of epidemic of certain types of crime in this society? What kind of law enforcement do we see? And finally, a very, very important thing to think about is the history. You can think about history in relation to almost all of these topics and questions just covered, but history is so important to creating a rich world when you're world building. You want to think about both the ancient history and the recent history, as these things will all have an effect on the current going-ons of the society. History affects how everything we just talked about has evolved. So rather than only creating the current timeline and current state of the society, you want to think about everything leading up to it. Everything from the rise and fall of a certain kingdom economically, to the historic tensions between these two countries, to the historical root behind certain societal customs and practices. So that's a start on world building. You could basically keep asking yourself questions forever and forever and forever when world building, so please let me know what I missed in the comments. If you want to learn more, I've left some resources in the description for you to check out. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time.